To be in harmony with the universe, you must learn to be in harmony with yourself. For the universe to have a purpose to your life, you must find the purpose of the universe for you. While we go on this journey of these paradoxical statements, we recognize the journey within ourselves to produce a happy, successful, and enjoyable life, perfectly in harmony with our divine purpose and flow. These are the studies of the ancient Tao Te Ching, and the question of what would water do? There are two types of Taoists. One works to be in harmony and follows these things as advice, commandments, and guidelines. Perfectly noble and eventually will succeed. And the other expresses from this harmony, naturally relating and recognizing the truth of these words, knowing and fulfilling their divinely written purpose. Inevitably bringing happiness and joy. We are here to discuss several interpretations of the Tao Te Ching and train our minds and emphasize the attributes of our higher self, inducing firsthand divine realization, an alternate dimensional state of the totality of the universe. Let's walk away from this recognizing that you are not this tiny being having a divine experience of the universe, but you that are the divine. The universe is experiencing this tiny self and enjoying every minute of it. I think it's appropriate to say konnichiwa. Konnichiwa. Hello, welcome So, what do we have planned here today? So far, that is it. That is it. My name is Devin Byrne, and I have been studying spirituality my entire life in one form or another. As I came from the Mormon church, what's a good word? Yeah, well... And I've expanded into unanswered questions in which they didn't have. And even though they answer a lot of questions that other religions don't, there is just more and more in which only my internal guidance was really taking me on this journey. And it did take me on a physical journey of 5 years, where I was seeking to transcend the world and find purpose and meaning. And I wouldn't say that I did anything but that, even though it was eventually occurred as a sudden moment of complete experience and realization. We hope to train our minds here to bring about this experience for yourself so you can recognize why you're here, so you can recognize what you're here to do. And as much as I want to say that you are an independent person having an independent purpose, you do, but on another dimensional experience, another dimensional level, coming to this divine realization, you'll see the exact same thing as everyone else would see, because we are the same one thing. So as much as I want to say I'm studying this Tao Te Ching to learn more from it, the only thing that's new to me about it is a new interpretation that this spirit has given to me, where it's more about purpose and the purpose of living. And yes, even though the Tao Te Ching has a lot of advice for authority figures and the attempts to help harmonize the use of government and things like that, this is well established in our own lives. Regardless of how the size of your family might be, you as an individual are the king or queen of your own little world, and you are working with other people all the time. And as much as you might want to say it's not happening, it is happening. And we're going to be asking the questions of what it takes to truly find peace in this situation and truly find happiness with our lives in every way. That if you train your mind in a fashion to recognizing the purpose that the divine written script of all nature it's very evident in, is also evident in you. But you're a new creation, a new evolution of what the world has to offer. That you entered into this fourth dimensional experience of knowing anything about time and recognizing that it occurs, and recognizing that who you are has its own independent self, an individual. You're not in the awareness of being complete connected and of everything. That this fourth dimension, this personal self, this personality, offered you this idea that you are a whole new situation. And while it's only true in this dimensional experience, being independent person, it is also true that every other dimension exists at the exact same moment. So all it takes is a little bit of a shifting of perception from recognizing what seems to be your focus as an individual self to recognizing an alternate dimension, not necessarily greater, but a higher percentage of focus of your reality and awareness, as if awareness is the only thing that you have that can expand, to recognizing that you are more and greater than you think you are. And while I have my unique ways of describing it, it's been given me this ways of describing that makes it possible for me to understand. So I might be a little different than some spiritual teachers that you have that might describe to you the Tao Te Ching and whatever other books, maybe A Course in Miracles. I describe it a little bit differently, as I will attest to you. I'm no longer attempting to escape or transcend the world. I know I can do that at any moment, and I am literally choosing to be here until we can all do this together. So to recognize that life is actually about fulfilling something we've desired for all eternity, and that it's not to be misunderstood, as this is the point of what we came to experience. As I said, you are greater and bigger and more expansive than you like to believe yourself to be. That idea is more so of what we're here to experience. Not just this third and fourth dimensional perspective of being a physical human body, and with this personality, this identity and remembrance of the past and recollection of memory and the anticipation of a future. But that there are 10 dimensions, 11 technically, of this dimensionals of reality, this actual perspective of the universe. Now I come to you from first-hand experience. I'm not discussing, even though we are talking and interpreting the Tao Te Ching for this, I'm not coming from a perspective of receiving knowledge solely from books, or I'm not regurgitating literary stuff that I've read, and I'm not just offering these ideas of what this guy said and that guy said and this woman said, or anything like that, even though those will be touched as well if it comes to my mind. But I'm quite literally just translating and interpreting not only the Tao Te Ching, but the Holy Spiritual Universe right in this moment, here offered to those who are specifically listening to this and found this information. And I will come from that. It is quite literally specifically for you. That anybody else that is not listening to this is not for them. And we're not completely concerned about who gets this information and who doesn't. We're going to learn how to go with the flow, how to allow this to happen, and quite literally recognize that we are one with the universe in every decision we make, in every movement we do, in everything that happens. That this personality, even though it thinks of itself as a king or a queen of this little area of its life, whether it be a family or just one person, it is learning to be even as water, which rules us all, that none of us could be in this situation without these representations, this element, even as water. That it is a very powerful element, and it has developed and been the source of all life. And they're looking for water on other planets just to indicate if it is possible to live on such a planet. So here we are. We, being an intellectual being, want to say that we are on top of the food chain, but still, without water, none of us would live any longer than a few more days. Just think of how amazing that really is. So it came into this interpretation as well, that to bring this idea of recognizing what would water do? How would water act? Where would water represent itself? What would water say? As we like to go by that kind of an idea, WWJD, we're doing WWWD. This idea connects you, and joins you with the ideas of nature, and recognizing that you are an aspect of nature. And even though you have a higher, greater self that transcends all this world naturally, that you came from a full aspect of consciousness that developed a universe in a spiritual nature and has souls among itself. And those souls came into these bodies, developing elements and the physicality of nature. Naturally, the nature is growing without resistance. to what it naturally is going to represent, that those elements of what the spiritual nature, which already exists, naturally shows. So trees, water, earth is all a different interpretation of the same spiritual elements in which is in the spiritual existence of the universe. So to look at nature and the way animals and plants work, you see that they grew from their perspective of what they become and what the seed has offered them from the spiritual nature of their existence. Two, have you grown from your perspective within the spiritual nature of the universe, offering what your seed has grown into and being that perspective of? This is kind of gives you an idea of what the purpose of life as we see it is, and that you can see that you've been given one thing, but you are more than this one thing. You are more than what you have an idea of. And just think of how amazing it is, even in this moment, to be comprehending these words, to be understanding this concept or not. Just the ability to have these thoughts and to comprehend this shows and indicates there is some sort of existence greater than what is this physical elements of the reality. And while that is identifying with this consciousness, that you have the ability and are this sentient being, it is through this perception that you can expand yourself, and it is through this awareness that this consciousness can expand what it knows, what it recognizes, and through that choosing, as I'm sure you've been on the path for years, choosing to have alternate recollections, to have alternate realizations, to bring about constant awareness of the divine self within you, and acting from that divine self, that deliberate chooser of the creation of this universe, the developer of all nature, the developer of all ideas, the one self united with all aspects of the universe. So while you're on this journey, it will seem as if it's powerful and stronger and greater for you to be more in still and at peace with yourself. It is often misunderstood, as we mentioned in the introduction, that there are two types of Taoists. One that strives for this harmony and peace, and usually even uses these principles to apply a reaction type, a type of reaction to certain scenarios in another. That when something happens, almost a lack of reaction chooses to happen. But the difference, and if we use the idea of water, is that when one actually recognizes the purpose and recognizes the power, not using these things for power, but recognizes the actual power and capability of doing absolutely anything, naturally a state of peace and harmony comes with it. Naturally, you are an expression and an image of what is this peace and harmony. The peace of God, as I would call it, is this idea that you have the power and capability of achieving absolutely anything. Say the blink of an eye, everything and anything can change by this power. So there's no reason to be afraid. There's only reason to blink. There's no reason to stress. There's only reason to blink. using that idea that to apply your power, your essence of love, this truth about yourself, when you actually recognize it, is not a struggle, but a natural state of the creation of the universe. So it's difficult to recognize this when you think you grew up in a world that has already been in existence before you came along. And then you had to figure your way out, a way through, and figure out what your ideas and what your purpose and what the world is all about after it's already existed for, say, billions of years. This is what the fourth dimensional perspective is and offers you, that it looks at the third body, the third dimension, the physical world, and sees it as if it has been here before the existence of yourself. But if we went to and came to the first dimensional perspective, we would recognize an identity that is still here, that is right now, previous to the existence of the universe. That even as I discussed that nature grows almost instantaneously, naturally, from the elements of the spiritual universe, in this very instant, in this very moment, is this divine consciousness expressing itself through this entirety of the universe, right in this moment. And you are an aspect as this personality of all of that. So when we recognize and identify what that actual source is, that power, that essence and ability to quite literally change its mind is changing the world, is changing the universe. You recognize that this is how you want the universe to be. This is what you want to be going through, putting your person through. You have developed and are developing this universe in this very instant. So as we're going to get into that a lot more, this is the recognition that there are alternate dimensions to each and every aspect of yourself. There is the consciousness previous to all existence, and then there is the soul, the elements of the spiritual universe, the movement and light and sound, emanation of the energy that moves, and the development of what these came into and blueprinted as this four elements of existence. We have water, earth, fire, air. And this and the recognition of what this is and how it looks as a physical world is actually here is through the perspective of the eyes of the consciousness previous to its existence. The consciousness that was born for me in 1985. The consciousness that could think of itself as going through past lives or future lives. The consciousness that tries to strive for enlightenment and thinks it's important to meditate. While I would talk in that fashion of meditation, I too have been in the perspective of thinking of meditation as very important. I've been on months and months of meditation courses and times and taking time of myself out in the middle of nowhere meditating. It wasn't until I had what I would call my death experience, pretty much of my personal self, did I recognize that the universe and the purpose of this universe, not only just conceptually, in which I really only can offer to you here, but an actual realization within myself of how from the very beginning of time, this not being a climax, but has built all up to this being, this person, this life. And it is continuing even in that sense. That's not a mistake that you're here. There is no mistakes, meaning everything has been a deliberate decision out of purpose. There is a purpose to your existence, regardless of what dimension you think of yourself. Each and every perspective or dimension has a deliberate purpose. Your life is not just day in, day out, but is fulfilling this purpose every single moment, every single day. While you might think of yourself as depressed and sad or upset about this or that, this is part of that purpose. That it is necessary in this state, this perspective of opposition, to learn again the ways of nature, the ways of harmony with the universe, so that you can find, and the indicator that you have found is this peace, this harmony, this actual joy and happiness for your life and for where you're at. You know if you find it, for you will naturally be happy. As this is the first episode, I've had many ideas of what is going to happen. Usually I go overboard. I start developing of this idea of what could be done on this program and how much we could do, as we're going to talk about different interpretations. I have not decided if this episode today is actually the first one or the introduction. I believe it would be sufficient being an introduction, as this whole thing is really not up to me as a personality, this Devon self, but the whole divine nature of everything unfolding, even in this moment. That I am simply allowing this to unfold within me, allowing this moment to unfold. As much as I want to wait to read my interpretation till the end, I believe it would be best to start with it and also end with it. As you may have heard, the Tao Te Ching and the great famous terms of such words as in the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is the eternal real. Naming is the origin of all particular things. Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only manifestations. Yet mystery and manifestation arise from the same source. The source is called darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. Now that was not my interpretation, as it naturally happened that I was reading a different one. And now to hear that and put it in comparison to what the interpretation that has been coming to me, even as this. The purpose that can be defined is not your eternal purpose. The name that you could be named is not your eternal name. The undefinable is your eternal reality. Defining is the origin of perceiving separate things. Free of discernment, you recognize this purpose. Caught in discernment, you see only its manifestations. Yet life's purpose and its manifestation arise from that same one idea. The source could only be defined as nothingness, nothing within nothingness, the source of everything. This is the gateway to all complete understanding. To complete understanding. See how you can relate with it a little differently. Almost as if you don't need to try and figure out purpose, or, in this word, the Tao. Often people are reading this, trying to figure out what Tao is. What is Tao? They keep saying Tao. What is it? And you hear it being translated as the way. The way. Well, even though that might be a direct translation, what is the way of water? What does water do? But what is the way of you? What is the way of who you are? What is your purpose? What is your reason for existing? What is your reason for being here? Why do you exist? As these all seem like existential, unanswered questions, the answer for them is quite literally within you. Right there, within yourself. And something about identifying with water and recognizing and looking at what would water do, you kind of recognize that there's an identity, a perspective, perceiving water, and practically an invisible substance. This invisible substance seems to and appears to have a very defined edge, and you really only can see it if the light is somehow reflected in it, or there's objects floating within it. Light or water, water actually derives from the element of sound, as in the spiritual nature of the universe, from movement. And you see, when water is stagnant, it is when it starts to grow things in it. Also, does air derive from sound? And that's the movement of energy. Air amplifies sound, and water muffles sound and represents sound. Much like light, fire emanates light, and earth smothers light and muffles light. And you are a development of all of these. You as this person that you seem to be so obsessed with, that you keep coming back to every single day. And you might be asking yourself, what is the purpose of me coming back to my life? Why do I keep being this personality? All of these answers are aware and within yourself, as we will be contemplating, almost a prayer of contemplation, such ideas even as this. The purpose that could be defined is not your eternal purpose. As much as your intellect wants to understand what purpose is, it might say, oh, my purpose is to have a family, have children. And then what happens when that's done? Then what is your purpose? That definition must not be your eternal definition. If your purpose is being the artist that you are and creating in the fashion that you do, what happens when your body dies and you no longer have these arms and hands that create this art? It must not be your eternal purpose. You might be a sport. You might think of your definition like this is who you are. Let's say you get paralyzed. Then who are you? What is the definition of your purpose now? It must not be your eternal purpose, especially if it is based off of a physicality. Many in spiritual practice will think that the purpose of their life is forgiving the world and forgiving beliefs and ideas and forgiving others for harming them and hurting them. While this is perfectly noble, what happens when there is no more world? What happens when you achieve what you've done? Then what is your eternal purpose? It must not be your eternal purpose if it is about this life, if it is about this world, if it is about how you deal and work with other people in this world. It might be your current purpose. It might be a very powerful, noble purpose that you have in this moment. But you can't say it's your eternal purpose, the purpose of all your existence. You have eternity in existence, and this is only a moment within that eternity. Can you embrace this moment in a different fashion? For the self that is eternal is fully committed to this person that you are doing today, and that you do and seem to be every day, finishing something it started. This idea that it was born, it will be there until it dies, even as a bubble pops to recognize it is not actually the bubble. It was the air within it. The name that you could be named is not your eternal name. Now this one seems a little more obvious, for even if you're into past life regression, these ideas that you as a body has a name, but many people are also getting into this soul name and having your soul has a name. But even your soul had a beginning, therefore it could and does have an end. The existence of your consciousness being this beginning and end, it is far exceeding any name in which any of this, even as I often will refer to this as Christ consciousness, it does not touch the vastness of comprehending, especially with the misunderstanding and interpretation of the word Christ over the last eon. But the actual essence of you is undefinable and has no name. It cannot have names. However, in each dimensional focus, you'll see, even as my name is Devin, I even had Awa Maharaj before, and I had Elation before, and these types of names. They were names that have moved, names that have changed. Even with the person, even with the soul, even with the ideas that were taking place. Through the dimensions, names exist, for even as this, the undefinable is your eternal reality. Defining is the origin of perceiving separate things. In this zeroth dimension and this first dimension of existence, there was and is no names. It was the development of names and defining of things that things came into existence, even as some would represent the beginning of all existence with a question of what am I? Or what are you? Or what is God? What is the universe? Any of these questions require definition. They require the defining of something to exist. And even if it is defining it as undefinable and vast, in that understanding, there must be something defining it. Therefore, it defines itself as separate from it. Even as in this perspective of everything, there was and must be a perceiver of this everything, and this nothingness being so eternal of everything that it is nothing. So even this 1% or 99% looks at the other half, the other part, and sees what it chooses to define. Through that was the beginning of all existence. A light. You're a light. There's a light. It's not so much let there be light. It's that it believed there was light. And what else was in existence but the movement or thought of consciousness? And this thought of consciousness thought of what light was, seeing the rest of its existence, the rest of the totality of all universes, as a representation of light. It could have been and seen as anything. But in that question, the answer came to the conclusion of it being light. This begat the spiritual nature of the universe, as I discussed with you, light and sound. It really is, and always has been, undefinable. So we come back to our life, and we read the next. Free of discernment, you recognize this purpose. Caught in discernment, you see only its manifestations. The thinking mind is a processing, a development of this actual nature, of the physical nature, which derived from the spiritual nature, and which derived from consciousness nature. Its ability to see objects is quite literally because it has the ability to discern itself different from what it perceives. It has the ability to discern things from other things. You look at your mother, you know it's your mother. You look at a computer, you know it's not your mother. You know it's a computer. You look at a crib, as I am, and you know it as a crib, and not a computer or your mother. And then even in this idea, you have the capability of recognizing this discernment between the 10,000 things. Maybe you say the 10 times 10,000 times 10,000 things. It is the ability to process and to think in which this mind has, which also has brought it down a road of believing that it is separate from all of these things and working against all of these things. And so it strives for suffering and pain more than it strives for understanding and peace and happiness. As we go to this, yet life's purpose and its manifestations arise from the same one idea. Now, the idea of your life, the existence of your life, even though it is threefold from the beginning and the existence of all time and space, and where the idea of yourself thought of light and thought of how everything is an existence of light. This says life's purpose and its manifestations, even as you look at the physical things, the separate things, and your life's purpose and what your life is only identified with physical things, separate things. It can only be identified with that, even as you would say, what is my purpose? And would conclude to such an experience of, my purpose is to forgive the world, is to forgive my brothers and sisters, or to forgive this experience and allow it to happen. It's still based off of physicality. It's still based off of separation. For that actual unity, that actual oneness needs no forgiveness. Therefore, your eternal purpose far exceeds such a life's purpose even as your own. As we're coming into the understanding of processing in this fashion, of what your eternal purpose, your eternal perspective is. Who are you after the disappearance of the universe, after the forgiving of a world? Who are you? What are you? And that leads into this. This source could only be defined as nothingness. Nothing within nothingness, the source of everything. Now, to get a little bit of more explanation of that, to think of an eternal perspective is a recognition of every last little thing that seems to be in existence. Now, take it if a cup, for an example, was everywhere, and this cup existed in everything, in every angle, in every perspective, in every space, in every spot. There would be nothing else. There wouldn't even be a cup. For one, you can't perceive a cup if there is nothing but cups. There's nothing a perceiver of a cup. In this understanding, and second, also, there is nothing else in existence to know if there was cups or not. So if you recognize the reality of your consciousness and the eternal aspect of what someone would say is God, or the totality of all universes, this perspective can't even know itself unless it developed a self, a son, that is a certain amount of percentage to perceive itself. So this source being nothing is the same thing as being everything. Being so eternal, it no longer exists. Being so infinite, it no longer even is in existence of perspective. For it is perspective. It is what is being perceived. So as you look at your life, even in this moment, you see physical things, and you see that you have a person and a personality and an identification with an awareness and a perception. And you have this capability to see this. You also can draw the line and say, this is where I exist and this is where everything else exists. So you have a certain amount, let's say that's a 1%, for example's sake, of the entirety of the universe and all universes and all perspectives of universes. You look at that universe. You are the perceiver of everything. It is by this percentage that you have the capability of seeing anything in existence. Even as your awareness will grow and is growing, even as you believe you grew from a child to an adult, each and every spiritual practice is bringing you to a greater and more expansive understanding and perspective of the universe. It does not stop within a perspective of conceptually understanding, but that there's 10 great dimensions, this same idea in which is only mostly focused on the third, fourth, and possibly fifth. You will reach such a vastness of infinity in this eternal landscape that you too, even as everything else, will disappear into the nothingness of its beginning, the source of everything, in which would only start over in a different fashion to experience the same thing in which it's experiencing now, differently. Now we think of that and we say such a thing, we're like, oh no, I don't want to do that. We think of it as happening in 10 years. Try 10 billion years. You have eternity in this perspective. There's no rush. There's no worry. There's no fuss. For you have all the power to be absolutely anything you want to be. And if you recognize not only that conceptually, but the actual source of that, it is all understanding of the universe. That simply by changing its mind, the universe changes. For the universe is a representation of its existence, of its mind, of you. So let's read that all at once now. The purpose that could be defined is not your eternal purpose. The name that you could be named is not your eternal name. The undefinable is your eternal reality. Defining is the origin of perceiving separate things. Free of discernment, you recognize the purpose. Caught in discernment, you see only its manifestations. Yet life's purpose and its manifestations arise from the same one idea. This source could only be defined as nothingness, nothing within nothingness, the source of everything. This is the gateway to all complete understanding. I gotta edit that. To complete understanding. Thank you, universe. Thank you for being here. And thank you for teaching us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining me on our journey to discovering and living from our true purpose and reason for existing. For more information about this and additional episodes, please visit www.openandclear.com. That's OPENANDCLEAR.com. If you have any additional questions or would like copies of the written version of this interpretation, please email us at openandclear@gmail.com. Thank you for being here in a sense of the entire existence of the universe. This universe, so vast and expansive, is complete because you are here. Without you, it is incomplete, and it is completely unaware of its completeness and its nothingness. I express my gratitude for you and who you really are in this very moment. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.